All right, so I have no idea how to do this. I just spent, I don't know, almost 10 minutes trying to figure out the TikTok Studio, which apparently you can't use unless you have 10,000 followers. So it's why did it even let me set it up and download it? And anyway, ridiculous. So I was going to do that because I could do it on my lap or my computer and share the screen that I am going to read from. Now, I don't think I can do that here. I can flip the camera and share it that way. So I guess we'll do that. Let's see. First off, can I throw a mod in here after I've started? Or do I need to have, let's see. Yeah, can I add the TikTok shop? Add products. I know. That works? Oh, Bluetooth is not supported. Okay. But I don't think I have a, how can I don't have wired headsets. This thing doesn't have a wired, anyway. All right, cool. Oh, okay, I can do that. That's nifty. All right, cool. Let's see. All right, there's that. I don't understand what any of this. Hello. Still figuring out how to do this whole live thing. I tried to do the TikTok live studio and it wouldn't let me because I don't have 10,000 followers. So that's fun. Anyways, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. My plan today is to just read like the first 16 pages of Project 2025. It is the foreword and the promises that they are giving to us so graciously. So I'm going to go ahead and flip it, I guess. So if you want to read along, you can. And I will share the link. It's in my tree of links if anybody is interested. Thank you everybody for joining. So let's go ahead and see if I can flip the camera. All right. All right, so here we go. Let's make it a little bit smaller now that I'm not had this all set up in the studio. So frustrated. All right, so A Promise to America by Kevin Roberts, PhD. 44 years ago, the United States and the conservative movement were in dire straits. That is 1980. Both had been betrayed by the Washington establishment and were uncertain whom to trust. Both were internally splintered and strategically adrift. Worse still, at that moment of acute vulnerability and division, we found ourselves besieged by existential adversaries, foreign and domestic. The late 1970s were, by any measure, a historic low point for America and the political coalition dedicated to preserving its unique legacy of human flourishing and freedom. Hello, everybody that is jumping in. If you would like, we are reading the foreword and promises that Project 2025 is so graciously giving to us. Let me state right now, I am very progressive and very left. So if you're here to cause problems, I don't know how I can add mods, but I will. Just putting it out there. Today, America and the conservative movement are enduring an era of division and danger akin to the late 1970s. Now, as then, our political class has been discredited by wholesale dishonesty and corruption. Now, let's look at that. Now, as then, our political class has been discredited by wholesale dishonesty and corruption. Yeah, I'd say so, but that's on both sides. That's because our corporations own this country, essentially, and we have legalized bribery. Look at America under the ruling and cultural elite today. Inflation is ravaging, family budgets, drug overdose deaths continue to escalate, and children suffer the toxic normalization of transgenderism with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries. Okay, drag queens inherently are not sexual. Some drag queen performances are sexual, some are not. Let's be real here, people. I am not purely sexual just by existing as a pansexual lesbian woman. All right. Overseas, a totalitarian communist dictatorship in Beijing is engaged in a strategic, cultural, and economic Cold War against America's interests, values, and people, all while globalist elites in Washington awaken only slowly to that growing threat. Moreover, low-income communities are drowning in addiction and government dependence. Contemporary elites have even repurposed the worst ingredients of 1970s radical chic to build the totalitarian cult known today as the Great Awakening. And now, as then, the Republican Party seems to have little understanding about what to do. Most alarming of all, the very moral foundations of our society are in peril. Cool. I don't disagree with you, Brooklyn Slim. I am purely reading this because I think everybody should. So hopefully people will join in and let's figure out how crazy this is together. Yet students of history will note that notwithstanding all those challenges, the late 1970s proved to be the moment when the political right unified itself and the country and led the United States to historic political, economic, and global victories. The Heritage Foundation is proud to have played a small but pivotal role in that story. If you do not know what the Heritage Foundation is or what it stands for, I am going to ask you right now to do a little bit of personal research. Look into it yourself. Look into who started it. Look into who funds it. Look into where the funding goes. Very important organization that is not here for our best interest. It was in early 1979, amid stagflation, gas lines, and the Red Army's invasion of Afghanistan, the nadir of Jimmy Carter's days of malaise, that Heritage launched the Mandate for Leadership project. We brought together hundreds of conservative scholars and academics across the conservative movement. Together, this team created a 20-volume, 3,000-page governing handbook containing more than 2,000 conservative policies to reform the federal government and rescue the American people from Washington dysfunction. It was a promise from the conservative movement to the country, confident, specific, and clear. Mandate for Leadership was published in January 1981, the same month Ronald Reagan was sworn into his presidency. By the end of that year, more than 60% of its recommendations had become policy, and Reagan was on his way to ending stagflation, reviving American confidence and prosperity, and winning the Cold War. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining. I didn't think anybody would jump in here because I am not a giant account, but I appreciate everybody being here. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them below. I will answer them as much as I can. Hopefully, I can get to 10,000 viewers at some point so I can use the TikTok Live Studio because then I can share this on the same screen as my face and see all the comments all at the same time. So, if you would like to read the rest of Project 2025 with us, we're still reading today. We're not done. But if you want to read the rest of it with us, please follow me. I'm going to read all 900 some pages of this. So, join with me. The bad news today is that our political establishment and cultural elite have once again driven America toward decline. The good news is that we know the way out, even though the challenges today are not what they were in the 1970s. Conservatives should be confident that we can rescue our kids, reclaim our culture, revive our economy, and defeat the anti-American left, at home and abroad. We did it before, and we will do it again. As Ronald Reagan put it, freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. It is not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation. This is the duty history has put before us and the standard by which our generation of conservatives will be judged, and we should not want it any other way. The legacy of Mandate for Leadership, and indeed of the entire Reagan Revolution, is that if conservatives want to save the country, we need a bold and courageous plan. This book is the first step in that plan. 900 pages is the first step in that plan. Okay, let's flip the camera again, and I'm going to talk to anybody who's hanging out now. So let me first off start by saying I am not a professional in this in any way, shape, or form. I do have a pre-law degree, but it is a master's level degree. It is not a doctoral level degree. It is not a Juris Doctorate. I am not a lawyer. I have a little bit of psychology and a little bit of sociology. I do have a psychology degree, and I took a little bit of sociology in college and economics and government, things like that. But I am by no means a person that is an expert at any of this. I am purely reading this as somebody who is a voter in this country, and I think that we all should know what is in this document, because if Trump wins, they're going to use this. They've already made it very clear that they want to use this as a blueprint for our country moving forward. And while there are people that I trust that have talked about this document, I have not seen anybody read it all the way through. And I know that not everybody wants to sit down and read 900 pages of something. So I'm going to do it. We're going to do it together. And if you guys have questions, like I said, along the way, feel free to drop them in the chat. If I can answer them, if I can read them while I'm trying to read this, I will. If I get to 10,000 followers and I can use the TikTok live studio, then that might be a little bit easier. But I'm not going to hold off until then to read this, because we vote in November and we need to know what they're planning on doing to us. Let's get back to it. All right. The Conservative Promise. This volume, The Conservative Promise, is the opening salvo of the 2025 Presidential Transition Project, launched by the Heritage Foundation and our many partners in April 2022. Its 30 chapters lay out hundreds of clear and concrete policy recommendations for White House offices, cabinet departments, Congress and agencies, commissions, and boards. Just as important as the scope of the Conservative Promises recommendations is the breadth of its authorship. This book is the product of more than 400 scholars and policy experts from across the conservative movement and around the country. And a few days ago, I did a video where I listed all of the authors and showed screenshots of all of the contributors, and there is a ton of them. Businesses and individuals alike that have donated to this book. So if you're interested, you can go back. It's just a few days ago, just a few videos back, and you can find that information. Contributors include former elected officials, world-renowned economists, and veterans from 4 presidential administrations. This is an agenda prepared by and for conservatives who will be ready on day one of the next administration to save our country from the brink of disaster. The Heritage Foundation is once again facilitating this work, but as our dozens of partners and hundreds of authors will attest, this book is the work of the entire conservative movement. As such, the authors express consensus recommendations already forged, especially along 4 broad fronts that will decide America's future. 1. Restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. Let's be very clear. The family they want to center is the middle class, white, straight, cisgender family, and everybody else they don't care about. Dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. Defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. Let's not take into consideration whether we're a global threat. Okay. Secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessings of liberty. What makes these 4 pieces of the Conservative Promise so valuable to the next president is that they cut through superficial distractions and focus on the moral and foundational challenges America faces in this moment of history. This was one of the secrets of conservatives' success in the Reagan era, one our generation should emulate. As in the late 1970s, Americans today experience the failures of political and cultural elites in countless ways, in the job market and in the grocery store checkout lines, on the streets and in our schools, in the media and within our institutions. But in truth, these daily dysfunctions are not innumerable problems, but innumerable manifestations of a few core crises. In 1979, the threats we faced were the Soviet Union, the socialism of the 1970s liberals, and the predatory deviancy of cultural elites. Reagan defeated these beasts by ignoring their tentacles and striking instead at their hearts. His approach to the Cold War? We win, they lose. I did, Sissy. In a video I shared the other day, I shared all of the different tables of contents, but I can show that again at the end if anybody's interested. It's just a very long document, so it takes a while to scroll back 35 pages to get there. Mind you, I'm only on like the third page of text that I'm reading. Everything before that was all of the table of contents and the contributors, so that's 30 some odd pages of that information. All right, his approach to the Cold War, we win and they lose. His economic agenda, the human dignity of work and its many rewards. His platform in the culture wars, the community of values embodied in these words: family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom. This book, and Project 2025 as a whole, will arm the next conservative president with the same kind of strategic clarity, but for a new age. Promise number 1. All right, let me check and see if there's any other comments or anything that I can answer while I'm here. Ta-da-ta-da. I appreciate that y'all are here, that y'all care enough, because this shit is important, and I think that it's important that we know about it. And if you guys feel like talking amongst yourselves, please do. Like I said, if I can answer questions as we go along, I will. It's a little bit difficult in this setup because I'm literally just holding my phone. See, there's my other hand. Okay. Promise number 1, restore the family as the centerpiece. No. I'm not having anybody join the live that I don't know. I'm sure people are just asking for help right now, and I appreciate that, but if I don't know you, especially with this contentious of a topic, you're not joining my live, so don't even ask. Restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. Sounds great, doesn't it? If only they actually meant it. The next conservative president must get to work pursuing the true priority of politics, the well-being of the American family. In many ways, the entire point of centralizing political power is to subvert the family. Its purpose is to replace people's natural love and loyalties with unnatural ones. You see, in this popular left-wing aphorism, government is simply the name we give to the things we choose to do together. But in real life, most of these things people, quote-unquote, do together have nothing to do with government. These are the mediating institutions that serve as the building blocks of any healthy society. Marriage, family, work, church, school, volunteering. Yeah, those have nothing to do with the government. Okay. The name real people give to the things we do together is community, not government. Funny, we'd say the same thing. Our lives are full of interwoven, overlapping communities, and our individual and collective happiness depends upon them. But the most important community in each of our lives and the life of the nation is the family. So far, other than calling marriage, family, work, church, school, volunteering having nothing to do with the government, I don't necessarily disagree. I just know that they mean something different when they use those words than when I do. Today, the American family is in crisis. 40% of all children are born to unmarried mothers, including more than 70% of Black children. I don't know how accurate that is. I should probably read ahead before I read with you guys so that I can share some information. But just because somebody is an unmarried mother doesn't mean your family's in crisis either. There is no government program that can replace the hole in a child's soul cut out by the absence of a father. Oh, I should have known that's where we were going. Of course, fatherlessness in the Black community, because that is so prevalent. Never happens in white families. Fatherlessness is one of the principal sources of American poverty, crime, mental health, teen suicide, substance abuse, rejection of the church, and high school dropouts. Wow. For doing as little as I'm not going to say that. Never mind. Just keep the insults to a minimum, Sarah. So many of the problems government programs are designed to solve, but can't, are ultimately problems created by the crisis of marriage and the family. The world has never seen a thriving, healthy, free, and prosperous society where most children grow up without their married parents. If current trends continue, we are heading towards social implosion. Furthermore, the next conservative president, trying to keep the center, guys, I'm sorry. Furthermore, the next conservative president must understand that using government alone to respond to symptoms of the crisis of the family crisis is a dead end. Federal power must instead be wielded to reverse the crisis, and rescue America's kids from familial breakdown. The conservative promise includes dozens of specific policies to accomplish this existential task. All right, let me reread this again. I should say up front, too, I have ADHD, so if I need to go back and reread something, I apologize. The next conservative president must understand that using government alone to respond to symptoms of the family crisis is a dead end. Yeah, sure, government alone, but that doesn't mean that government can't help. Okay, all right. Some are obvious and long-standing goals, like eliminating marriage penalties in federal welfare programs and the tax code, and installing work requirements for food stamps. Work requirements for food stamps. Okay. So you have to work in order to be able to eat. Okay. All right, cool. What about if you're sick or disabled? Sure. Okay. Like my mother-in-law is on food stamps. She's in her 70s and has Alzheimer's. You're gonna tell me that you're gonna force her to work in order to keep her food stamps? Ridiculous. Okay. But we must go further. It's time for policymakers to elevate family authority, formation, and cohesion as their top priority, and even use government power, including through the tax code, to restore the American family. I really am trying to keep it center so that you all can read it if you want to. If you guys don't care about reading this, I can just show my face reading it, but that's going to be boring too. All right. Where was I? Today, the left is threatening the tax-exempt status of churches and charities that reject woke progressivism. They will soon turn to Christian schools and clubs with the same totalitarian intent. I would love for anybody on the right to explain to me what totalitarian means. The next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for woke culture warriors. So many fucking buzzwords. So many buzzwords. Thank you, everybody who's joining. I have no idea how many people are actually here, but I appreciate everybody jumping in. Say hi if you want to, ask questions if you'd like. I know it's kind of boring to just read this, but this is what the conservatives want to do to our country if they get into the presidency. So I think it's important that we all go through this. The next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for woke culture warriors. This starts with deleting the terms sexual orientation and gender identity. You're just going to delete the term. You can't delete the people. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Gender. So we're not going to have gender anymore? Just nobody's going to have gender? I mean, that would be preferable to the binary that they want to live in. Gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive. Okay. Abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights out of every federal rule, agency regulation, contract, grant, regulation, and piece of legislation that exists. What about my right to express myself the way I want to express myself? What about my right to my body? You're worried about First Amendment rights of, they don't even say any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights. You can say whatever you want to say. What are the things in the First Amendment? Does everybody know? It is SPARP, S-P-A-R-P, speech, press, assembly, religion, petition. You can say whatever you want. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be any consequences for the things that you say. This is just such victim mentality. All right. Pornography, manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children, for instance, is not a political Gordian knot extricably binding up disparate claims about free speech, property rights, sexual liberation, and child welfare. It has no claim to First Amendment protection. Pornography has no claim to First Amendment protection. Okay. Sure. Its purveyors are child predators and misogynistic exploiters of women. Is there exploitation of women in the pornography industry? Sure, absolutely. That's why we want sex workers to have control of their own lives and their own incomes and their own rules and regulations. It doesn't have to be exploiting women. It is currently in a lot of cases, but it doesn't have to be. Their product is as addictive as any illicit drug and as psychologically destructive as any crime. Again, it doesn't have to be. Can it be? Sure, but it doesn't have to be. Pornography should be outlawed. Okay, that's hilarious. Because does anybody know which states consume the most pornography? Red states. Do the people on their side that are supporting this, have they even bothered to read? We're not even 16 pages in, because that's all I'm going to read today. And yeah, okay. I know a lot of people on the right that would not like that. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Imprisoned. If you make a video I don't like, you should go to jail. That's cool. Educators and public librarians. Public librarians? I don't know much porn that is in public libraries. Who purvey it should be classed as registered sex offenders. And educators. Like maybe if you're in college and you're doing like a human sexuality course, maybe, but you're not going to be watching pornography. You'd be talking about it, but you wouldn't be watching it. That's wild. What do they think happens in this country? And telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered. I would be very curious, and this is again why maybe I should read ahead before I come on and read with you all, because the people that own the big porn like sites, who owns those sites? Because we know that everything in this country is owned by a few people / corporations. So it's entirely possible that if you follow the chain up, people that telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate porn are probably owned by right-wingers. Oh, geez. In our schools, the question of parental authority over their children's education is a simple one. Schools serve parents, not the other way around. Actually, schools should serve children. That is, of course, the best argument for universal school choice, a goal all conservatives and conservative presidents must pursue. But even before we achieve that long-term goal, parents' rights as their children's primary educators should be non-negotiable in American schools. I'm pretty sure that most schools, if it's like a controversial subject, give parents the option to opt out. Wild. Okay. American schools. States, cities, and counties, school boards, union bosses, principals, and teachers who disagree should be immediately cut off from federal funds. As if schools are getting funded enough already. Just cut them off because I don't like what you're teaching. Cool. Alright, maybe if I can, really am trying to like hold this still. I'm a shaky person. There we go. Alright. The noxious tenets of critical race theory and gender ideology should be excised from the curricula in every public school in the country. Critical race theory is a graduate level idea. I have 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree, and I never learned critical race theory in school. These theories poison our children, who are being taught, on the one hand, to affirm that the color of their skin fundamentally determines their identity, and even their moral status, while on the other, they are taught to deny the very creatureliness that inheres in being human and consists in accepting the givenness of our nature as men or women. Geez, this is difficult to read. Like, their words are difficult. Anyway, all right. Allowing parents or physicians to quote-unquote reassign the sex of a minor is child abuse and must end. Oh, this is going to make me angry. Okay. For public institutions to use taxpayer dollars to declare the superiority or inferiority of certain races, sexes, and religions is a violation of the Constitution and civil rights law and cannot be tolerated by any government anywhere in the country. Okay. Gender affirmative care, reassignment surgery is not generally covered often in our country. So taxpayer dollars wouldn't be going to it, even if it is. Anyway, I'm not going to go into too much or I'll be here for hours. But if anybody's interested in what I believe, you can ask. Obviously, I don't agree with anything that this is saying, but the pro-family promises expressed in this book and central to the next conservative president's agenda must go much further than the traditional narrow definition of family issues. Every threat to family stability must be confronted. This resolve should color each of our policies. Consider our approach to big tech. The worst of these companies prey on children, like drug dealers, to get them addicted to their mobile apps. Many Silicon Valley executives famously don't let their own kids have smartphones. Oh, there's a little thing there. We should see what that links to. They nevertheless make billions of dollars addicting other people's children to theirs. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms are specifically designed to create the digital dependencies that fuel mental illness and anxiety, to fray children's bonds with their parents and siblings. Federal policy cannot allow this industrial-scale child abuse to continue. Again, most of these companies are owned probably by people on the right wing. So we're just going to get rid of all of them? Sure. I'm sure the corporatocracy that we live under is going to allow that to happen. Finally, conservatives should gratefully celebrate the greatest pro-family win in a generation. Overturning Roe v. Wade. A decision that for 5 decades made a mockery of our Constitution and facilitated the deaths of tens of millions of unborn children. But the Dobbs decision is just the beginning. Just the beginning. Is everybody listening? Conservatives in the states and in Washington, including in the next conservative administration, should push as hard as possible to protect the unborn in every jurisdiction in America. Meanwhile, we're not going to do anything to protect the actual born that are already here. In particular, the next conservative president should work with Congress to enact the most robust protections for the unborn that Congress will support, while deploying existing federal powers to protect innocent life and vigorously complying with statutory bans on the federal funding of abortion. Federal funds don't fund abortion. It's not hard to find this out. Conservatives should ardently pursue the pro-life and pro-family policies. We'll see how pro-family these policies are as we actually go through them, while recognizing the many women who find themselves in immensely difficult and often tragic situations and the heroism of every choice to become a mother. Oh, here you believe in choice, as long as it's a choice to become a mother, not a choice not to become a mother. Alternative options to abortion, especially adoption, should receive federal and state support. Yes, because our adoption system is not full of children who can't find homes and is not immensely harmful to the children that are adopted out of it, or stuck in it for that matter. In summary, the next president has a moral responsibility to lead the nation in restoring a culture of life in America again. So that's promise number 1. Promise number 2, dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. Of course, the surest way to put the federal government back to work for the American people is to reduce its size and scope back to something resembling the original constitutional intent. We don't live like they did. I don't know how you plan on doing that. Okay, conservatives desire a smaller government, not for its own sake, but for the sake of human flourishing. But the Washington establishment doesn't want a constitutionally limited government because it means they lose power and are held more accountable by the people who put them in power. They are not accountable now, or else we would have them doing things we want them to do instead of this bullshit. Like restoring popular sovereignty, the task of reattaching the federal government's constitutional and democratic tethers call to mind Ronald Reagan's observations that there are no easy answers, but there are simple answers. In the case of making the federal government smaller, more effective, and accountable, the simple answer is the Constitution itself. The surest proof of this is how strenuously and creatively generations of progressives and many Republican insiders have worked to cut themselves free from the strictures of the 1789 Constitution and subsequent amendments. Consider the federal budget. Under the current law, Congress is required to pass a budget and 12 issue-specific spending bills comporting with it every single year. The last time Congress did so was in 1996. Congress no longer meaningfully budgets, authorizes, or categorizes spending. I don't disagree that Congress is sometimes useless, but okay. Instead, party leaders negotiate one multi-trillion-dollar spending bill, several thousand pages long. Meanwhile, this is almost 1,000 pages long. Okay. And then vote on it before anyone literally has had a chance to read it. Debate time is restricted, amendments are prohibited, and all of this is backed up against a midnight deadline when the previous omnibus spending bill will run out and the federal government, quote unquote, shuts down. This process is not designed to empower 330 million American citizens and their elected representatives, but rather to empower the party elites secretly negotiating without any public scrutiny or oversight. In the end, congressional leaders' behavior and incentives are no different from those of global elites, insinuating policy decisions over the climate, trade, public health, you name it, from the sovereignty of national electorates. Public scrutiny and democratic accountability make life harder for policymakers, so they skirt it. It's not dysfunction, it's corruption. And despite its gaudy price tag, the federal budget is not even close to the worst example of this corruption. That distinction belongs to the administrative state, the dismantling of which must a top priority. That distinction belongs to the administrative state. There we go. The dismantling of which must a top priority. No, that still doesn't make sense. Must be a top priority for the next conservative president. Looks like we're missing a word here, people. The term administrative state refers to the policymaking work done by the bureaucracies of all the federal governments, departments, agencies, and millions of employees under Article 1 of the Constitution. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and of a House of Representatives. That is, federal law is enacted only by elected legislators in both houses of Congress. This exclusive authority was part of the framers' doctrine of separated powers. They not only split the federal government's legislative, executive, and judicial powers into different branches. That's not a full sentence. They not only split the federal government's legislative, executive, and judicial powers into different branches, period. We're missing something here. These are the people that want to run our fucking country. Are you serious? They also gave each branch checks over the other. That should have been a comma, people. Under our Constitution, the legislative branch, Congress, is far and away the most powerful and correspondingly the most accountable to the people. In recent decades, members of the House and Senate discovered that if they give away that power to the Article 2 branch of government, they can also deny responsibility for its actions. So today in Washington, most policy is no longer set by Congress at all, but by the administrative state. Given the choice between being powerful but vulnerable or irrelevant but famous, most members of Congress have chosen the latter. Congress passes intentionally vague laws that delegate decision-making over a given issue to a federal agency. That agency's bureaucrats, not just unelected, but seemingly unfireable. Well, yeah, that's what term limits are for. Then leap at the chance to fill the vacuum created by Congress's preening cowardice. The federal government is growing larger and less constitutionally accountable, even to the president, every year. A combination of elected and unelected bureaucrats at the Environmental Protection Agency quietly strangles domestic energy production through difficult-to-understand rulemaking processes. Bureaucrats at the department. Sorry, guys, my hand is bugging me a lot. I want you to be able to see this, but bureaucrats at the Department of Homeland Security, following the lead of a feckless administration, order border and immigration enforcement agencies to help migrants criminally enter our country with impunity. Bureaucrats at the Department of Education inject racism, anti-American, ahistorical propaganda into America's classrooms. Really, I wonder if they're going to define that stuff later on. Bureaucrats at the Department of Justice force school districts to undermine girls' sports and parents' rights to satisfy transgender extremists. You know, like the 9-year-old transgender girl who wants to be on the swim team. She's the extremist they're talking about. Okay. Woke bureaucrats at the Pentagon force troops to attend quote unquote training seminars about white privilege. And bureaucrats at the State Department infuse U.S. foreign aid programs with woke extremism about intersectionality and abortion. You know, if our government learned more about intersectionality, maybe we'd be in a better place. Unaccountable federal spending is the secret lifeblood of the Great Awakening. I love that they're giving names to us that we have not even given ourselves. Nearly every power center held by the left is funded or supported one way or another through the bureaucracy by Congress. Colleges and school districts are funded by tax dollars. The administrative state holds 100% of its power at the sufferance of Congress, and its insulation from presidential disciplines is an unconstitutional fairy tale spun by the Washington establishment to protect its turf. Members of Congress shield themselves from constitutional accountability, often when the White House allows them to get away with it. Cultural institutions like public libraries and public health agencies are only as quote unquote independent from public accountability as elected officials and voters permit. Let's be clear. The most egregious regulations promulgated by the current administration come from one place, the Oval Office. The president cannot hide behind the agencies. As his many executive orders make clear, his is the responsibility for the regulations that threaten American communities, schools, and families. A conservative president must move swiftly to do away with these vast abuses of presidential power and remove the career and political bureaucrats who fuel it. Properly considered, restoring fiscal limits and constitutional accountability to the federal government is a continuation of restoring national sovereignty to the American people. In foreign affairs, global strategy, federal budgeting, and policymaking, the same pattern emerges again and again. Ruling elites slash and tear at restrictions and accountability placed on them. They centralize power up and away from the American people, to supranational treaties and organizations, to left-wing quote-unquote experts, to sight unseen, all or nothing legislating, to the unelected career bureaucrats of the administrative state. Hello, everybody who's joining. We are reading the 2025 Presidential Transition Project. We are by no means reading it all tonight. We are just reading the foreword and the first 4 promises. We are not even through the second one yet. As monolithic, nobody's monolithic. No group of people is monolithic. As monolithic as the left's institutional power appears to be, it originates with appropriations from Congress and is made completely by a feckless president. And if we're talking about the quote-unquote left's institutional powers, meaning like people in power in politics, they're more like the right than the right wants to admit. A conservative president must look to the legislative branch for decisive action. The administrative state is not going anywhere until Congress acts to retrieve its own power from bureaucrats and the White House. But in the meantime, there are many executive tools a courageous conservative president can use to handcuff the bureaucracy, push Congress to return to its constitutional responsibility, restore power over Washington to the American people, bring the administrative state to heel, and in the process, defang and defund the woke culture warriors who have infiltrated every last institution in America. The conservative promise lays out how to use many of these tools, including how to fire supposedly quote unquote unfireable federal bureaucrats, how to shutter wasteful and corrupt bureaus and offices, how to muzzle woke propaganda at every level of government, how to restore the American people's constitutional authority over the administrative state, and how to save untold taxpayer dollars in the process. Finally, the president can restore public confidence and the accountability to our most important government function of all, national defense. The American people desire a military full of highly skilled servicemen and women who can protect the homeland and our interests overseas. The next conservative president must end the left's social experimentation with the military. Jesus Christ. Restore warfighting as its sole mission and set defeating the threat of the Chinese Communist Party as its highest priority. Yeah, that sounds fun. That's lovely. Fantastic. The next conservative president must possess the courage to relentlessly put the interests of the everyday American over the desires of the ruling elite. Their outrage cannot be prevented. It must simply be ignored. And it can be. The left derives its power from the institutions they control. But those institutions are only powerful to the extent that constitutional officers surrender their own legitimate authority to them. A president who refuses to do so and uses his or her office to reimpose constitutional authority over federal policymaking can begin to correct decades of corruption and remove thousands of bureaucrats from the positions of public trust they have so long abused. So now we start to see where everybody's talking about if Trump gets in, he's going to start getting rid of people who have been in their positions for a really long time and who are only loyal to him. So they're apparently going to lay out how they plan on doing that. So we're not going to get to that today, but we will eventually. Like I said at the beginning, if I can get to 10,000 followers, I'll do this on TikTok Studio where I can share this and me, and we can have chats and everything else along with it. So if you're jumping in and you want to follow along as we read the other 900 pages of this document together in parts, not doing this all at once, please join, follow, whatever. Promise 3, defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. The United States belongs to we the people. All government authority derives from the consent of the people, and our nation's success derives from the character of its people. The American people's right to rule ourselves is the obverse of our duty. We cannot outsource to others our obligation to ensure the conditions that allow our families, local communities, churches and synagogues, and neighborhoods to thrive. The buck stops with each of us, so each of us must have the freedom to pursue the goods for ourselves and those entrusted to our care. I swear sometimes they use certain words to make it sound enticing. Like there's little bits and pieces that if you just took a piece of it, you could be like, oh, that sounds good. Like a sentence or two. And then you read the rest of it around it, and that's where it gets scary. To most Americans, this is common sense. But in Washington, D.C. and other centers of leftist power, like the media and the academy, this statement of basic civics is branded hate speech. Progressive elites speak in lofty terms of openness, progress, expertise, cooperation, and globalization. But too often, these terms are just rhetorical Trojan horses concealing their true intention, stripping we the people of our constitutional authority over our country's future. Oh, boy. America's corporate and political elites do not believe in the ideals to which our nation is dedicated: self-governance, the rule of law, and ordered liberty. They certainly do not trust the American people, and they disdain the Constitution's restrictions on their ambitions. Instead, they believe in a kind of 21st century Wilsonian order to which the enlightened, highly educated managerial elite runs things rather than the humble, patriotic working families who make up the majority of what the elites contemptuously call flyover country. Sorry, water break. This Wilsonian hubris has spread like a cancer through many of America's largest corporations, its public institutions, and its popular culture. Those who run our so-called American corporations have bent to the will of the woke agenda and care more for their foreign investors and organizations than their American workers and customers. Today, nearly every top-tier U.S. university president or Wall Street hedge fund manager has more in common with the socialist European head of state than with the parents of a high school football game in Waco, Texas. Many elites' entire identity, it seems, is wrapped up in their sense of superiority over those people. But under our Constitution, they are mere equals of the workers who shower after work instead of before. This is as it should and must be. Okay, I guess this is as it should and must be. Well, if it is as it should and must be, why are you trying to change anything? Intellectual sophistication, advanced degrees, financial success, and all other markers of elite status have no bearing on a person's knowledge of the one thing most necessary for governance: what it means to live well. That knowledge is available to each of us, no matter how humble our backgrounds or how unpretentious our attainments. It is open to us to read in the book of human nature, to which we are all offered the key just by merit of our shared humanity. One of the great premises of American political life is that everyone who can read in that book must have a voice in deciding the course and fate of our republic. And that is exactly why I'm reading this book. Progressive policymakers and pundits in America either fail to understand this premise or intentionally reject it. They enthusiastically support supranational organizations like the United Nations and European Union, which are run and staffed almost entirely by people who share their values, and are mostly insulated from the influence of national elections. That's why they are eager for America to sign an international treaty on everything from the pharmaceutical patents to climate change to the rights of the child, quote unquote, rights of the child, and why those treaties invariably endorse policies that could never pass through the U.S. Congress. Like the progressive Woodrow Wilson a century ago, the woke left today seeks a world bound by global treaties they write, in which they exercise dictatorial powers over all nations without being subject to the democratic accountability. That's why today's progressive left so cavalierly supports open borders despite the lawless humanitarian crisis their policy created along America's southern borders. They seek to purge the very concept of the nation state from the American ethos, no matter how much crime increases or resources drop for schools and hospitals or wages decrease for the working class. Open borders activism is a classic example of what the German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer called cheap grace, publicly promoting one's own virtue without risking any personal inconvenience. Indeed, the only direct impact of open borders on pro-open borders elites is that the constant flow of illegal immigration suppresses the wages of their housekeepers, landscapers, and busboys. Yes, because that's the only jobs immigrants can have, right? Cheap grace aptly describes the left's love affair with environmental extremism. Those who suffer most from the policies environmentalism. Okay, let me try that again. Those who suffer most from the policies environmentalism would have us enact are the aged, poor, and vulnerable. Those are the groups that also suffer the most from the climate policy. We're talking about environmentalism. Okay. It is not a political cause, but a pseudo-religion meant to baptize liberals' ruthless pursuit of absolute power in the holy water of environmental virtue. Wow. I'm going to have a headache at the end of this. I can already tell. At its very heart, environmental extremism is decidedly anti-human. Stewardship and conservation are supplanted by population control and economic regression. Environmental ideologues would ban the fuels that run almost all of the world's cars, planes, factories, farms, and electricity grids. Well, sure, but we'd have to have another way to use those things before we banned the fuels. Like, we don't just want to ban the fuels, we want to have cleaner energy, God forbid. Abandoning confidence in human resilience and creativity in responding to the challenges of the future would raise impediments to the most meaningful human activities. They would stand human affairs on their heads, regarding human activity itself as fundamentally a threat to be sacrificed to the God of nature. It doesn't have to be, though. The same goals are the heart of elite support for economic globalization. For 30 years, America's political, economic, and cultural leaders embraced and enriched communist China and its genocidal Communist Party while hollowing out America's industrial base. What may have started out with good intentions has now been made unclear. Unfettered trade with China has been a catastrophe. It has made a handful of American corporations enormously profitable while twisting their business incentives away from the American people's needs. Again, a sentence that on its own I could potentially agree with. But with everything else surrounding it, there's questions. For a generation, politicians of both parties promised that engagement with Beijing would grow our economy while injecting American values into China. The opposite has happened. American factories have closed, jobs have been outsourced, our manufacturing economy has been financialized, and all along, the corporations profiting failed to export our values of human rights and freedom. Rather, they imported China's anti-American values into their C-suites. Even before the rise of big tech, Wall Street ignored China's serial theft of American intellectual property. It outright cheered the elimination of American manufacturing jobs. Learn to code, they would gloat. These were just the price of progress. Engagement was at every step Beijing's project, not America's. The Chinese Communist Party dictated terms, only to break them whenever it suited. They stole our technology, spied on our people, and threatened our allies, all with trillions of dollars of wealth and military power financed by their access to our market. Then came the rise of big tech, which is now less a contributor to the U.S. economy than it is a tool of China's government. In exchange for cheap labor and regulatory special treatment from Beijing, America's largest technology firms funneled data about Americans to the CCP. They hand over sensitive intellectual property with military and intelligence applications to keep the money rolling in. They let Beijing censor Chinese users on their platforms. They let the CCP set their corporate policies about mobile apps. And they run interference for our rivals' political priorities in Washington. One side of big tech companies' business model is old-fashioned American competitiveness and world-changing technological innovation. But increasingly, that side of these businesses is overshadowed by their role as operatives in the lucrative employ of America's most dangerous international enemy. It's like they live in a James Bond film. If you want to understand the we're on TikTok. Look, we're dangerous. If you want to understand the danger posed by collaboration between big tech and the CCP, look no further than TikTok. The highly addictive video app used by 80 million Americans every month. Wave to the conservatives, everybody. Wave. Okay. Used by 80 million Americans every month and overwhelmingly popular among teenage girls, is in effect a tool of Chinese espionage. The ties between TikTok and the Chinese government are not loose, and they are not coincidental. The same can be observed by many U.S. colleges and universities. Through the CCP's Confucius Institutes, Beijing has been just as successful at compromising and co-opting our higher education system as they have at compromising and co-opting corporate America. A casual reader might take the last few pages as surveying a broad array of challenges facing the American people and the next conservative president: supranational policymaking, border security, globalization, engagement with China, manufacturing, big tech, and Beijing compromised colleges. Okay, so we just listed all of the challenges. Okay. But they really are not But these really are not many issues but two. One, that China is a totalitarian enemy of the United States, not a strategic partner or fair competitor. And two, that America's elites have betrayed the American people. Mind you, all of the people that are writing this are freaking elites. Okay? Every single one of them. Go back to the video I posted a few days ago where I listed all of the authors and donors and contributors. They're all big corporations and elite rich people. Okay. The solution to all of the above problems, that's a clunky sentence, is not to tinker with this or that government program to replace this or that bureaucrat. That's not really a full sentence either. It's not to tinker with this or that government to replace this or that bureaucrat, period. I'm on page 12. I've already found several incomplete sentences and things that don't make sense. So these people want to run our country. Oh, geez. These are problems not of technocratic efficiency, but of national sovereignty and constitutional governance. We solve them by trimming and reshaping the leaves. We solve them not by trimming and reshaping the leaves, but by ripping out the trees, root and branch. which is funny because if you think about the like defund the police, and we've all talked about you can't just retrain people, you can't just reshape it. We have to start from the ground up. That's essentially what they're talking about here. But God, did they scream when we tried to say that. International organizations and agreements that erode our Constitution, rule of law, or popular sovereignty should not be reformed. They should be abandoned. Illegal immigration should be ended, not mitigated. The border sealed, not reprioritized. Economic engagement with China should be ended, not rethought. Our manufacturing and industrial base should be restored, not allowed to deteriorate further. Confucius Institutes, TikTok, and any other arm of Chinese propaganda and espionage should be outlawed, not merely monitored. Universities taking money from the CCP should lose their accreditation, charters, and eligibility for federal funds. The next conservative president should go beyond merely defending America's energy interests, but go on offense, asserting them around the world. America's vast reserves of oil and natural gas are not an environmental problem. They are the lifeblood of economic growth. American dominance of the global energy market would be a good thing for the world and, more importantly, for we the people. It's not just about jobs, even though unleashing domestic energy production would create millions of them. It's not just about higher wages for workers who didn't go to college, though they would receive the raises they have missed out on for 2 generations. Full spectrum strategic energy dominance would facilitate the reinvigoration of America's entire industrial and manufacturing sector as we disentangle our economy from China. Globally, it would rebalance power away from dangerous regimes in Russia and the Middle East. It would build powerful alliances with fast-growing nations in Africa and provide us the leverage to counter Chinese ambitions in South America and the Pacific. Locally, it would drive billions of dollars to private investments to the communities that have been hammered by globalization since the 1990s. And it would clarify our intentions to Beijing that the next president can ensure that a large part of America's reindustrialization is in the production of the equipment we will need to dissuade future foreign meddling with U.S. vital interests. I'm very curious to see how these promises play out in their policy that they're suggesting. Secure our God-given individual right to enjoy the blessings of liberty. This is promise number 4, and I believe it's the last promise. The Declaration of Independence famously asserted... Let's start that over again. The Declaration of Independence famously asserted the belief of America's founders that all men are created equal and endowed the God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's the pursuit of happiness, that is central to America's heroic experiment in self-government. When the founders spoke of pursuit of happiness, what they meant might be understood today as, in essence, pursuit of blessedness. But what is blessedness is going to be different to every person. I guess happiness is too. That is, an individual must be free to live as his creator ordained, or didn't ordain if you don't have a creator, to flourish, or if you don't believe in one. Our Constitution grants each of us the liberty to do not what we want, but what we ought. This pursuit of the good life is found primarily in family, marriage, children, Thanksgiving dinners, and the like. Many find happiness through their work. Think of dedicated teachers or healthcare professionals you know, entrepreneurs or plumbers throwing themselves into their businesses. Anyone who sees a job well done as a personal reward. Religious devotion and spirituality are the greatest sources of happiness around the world. And I'm going to add, for some people. Still, others find themselves happiest in their local voluntary communities of friends, their neighbors, their civic or charitable work. The American Republic was founded on principles prioritizing and maximizing individual rights to life. The American Republic was founded on principles prioritizing and maximizing individuals' rights to live their best life or to enjoy what the framers called the blessings of liberty. It's this radical equality, liberty for all, not just of rights, but of authority, that the rich and powerful have hated about democracy in America since 1776. They resent Americans' audacity in insisting that we don't need them to tell us how to live. It's the inalienable right of self-direction, of self-direction, so long as you're going in the direction I want you to go, of each person's opportunity to direct himself or herself and his or her community to the good that the ruling class disdains. With the Declaration and Constitution, our nation's founders handed to us the means with which to preserve this right. Abraham Lincoln wrote of the Declaration as an apple of gold in a silver frame, the Constitution. So must the next conservative president look to these documents when the elites mount their next assault on liberty. Left to our own devices, the American people rejected European monarchy and colonialism, just as we've rejected slavery, second-class citizenship for women, mercantilism, socialism, Wilsonian globalism, fascism, communism, and today, wokeism. To the left, these assertions of patriotic self-assurance are just so many signs of our moral depravity and intellectual inferiority, proof that, in fact, we need a ruling elite making decisions for us. Yeah, I don't necessarily think the left thinks that, but go off, people. But the next conservative president should be proud, not ashamed of Americans' unique culture of society. Oh, geez, let's start that again. But the next conservative president should be proud, not ashamed, of Americans' unique culture of social equality and ordered liberty. That's an interesting ordered liberty. That's an interesting little. After all, the countries where Marxist elites have won political and economic power are all weaker, poorer, and less free for it. The United States remains the most innovative and upwardly mobile society in the world. I don't know if that's accurate, but all right. Government should stop trying to substitute its own preferences for those of the people. And the next conservative president should champion the dynamic genius of free enterprise against the grim miseries of elite-directed socialism. The promise of socialism, communism, Marxism, progressivism, fascism, whatever name it chooses, socialism, communism, Marxism, progressivism, fascism, those do not all mean the same things. And these people want to run our country. It is simple. Government control of the economy can ensure equal outcomes for all people. Ensure. I can read. Government control of the economy can ensure equal outcomes for all people. The problem is that it has never done so. Just because it never has doesn't mean it couldn't if it was set up properly. There is no such thing as, quote unquote, the government. There are just people who work for the government and wield its power and who, at almost every opportunity, wield it to serve themselves first and everyone else a distant second. While I don't disagree with that, they have no idea how to fix it. We could fix it. This is not a failing of one nation or socialist party, but inherent in human nature. Nighttime satellite images of the Korean Peninsula famously show the free market South lit up, with homes, businesses, and cities electrified from coast to coast. By contrast, the communist North Korea is almost completely dark, except for the small dot of the capital city, Pyongyang, where the psychotic dictator and his cronies live. The same phenomenon is on display in the infuriating fact that 4 of the 6 richest counties in the United States are suburbs of Washington, D.C., a city infamous for its lack of native productive industries. All right. We see the same corruption expressed on an individual level whenever billionaire climate activists who want to outlaw carbon-fueled transportation fly to A-list conferences on their private jets. Look, we don't like that either. Or when COVID-19 Or when COVID-19 shut down politicians like former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and California Governor Gavin Newsom were caught at the hair salon or dining at a fancy restaurant after moralizing about how everyone else must stay home and forego such luxuries during the pandemic. Again, we didn't agree with that either. For socialists who are almost always well-to-do, are you guys well-to-do? Not that everybody watching is a socialist necessarily, but socialism is not a means of equalizing outcomes, but a means of accumulating power. They never get around to helping anyone else. Again, that little, this right here, I don't necessarily disagree with. It's everything else surrounding it that becomes the problem. The Soviet Empire was a social and economic failure. North Korea, despite the opulence of its tyrants, is one of the poorest nations in the world. Cuba is so corrupt that its people regularly risk their lives to escape to Florida on rafts. Yeah, Venezuela was once the richest nation in South America. Today, a decade after a Marxist dictator took over, 94% of Venezuelans live in poverty. Even Socialist Senator Bernie Sanders' home state of Vermont was forced to repeal the state's single-payer healthcare system just 3 years after creating it. In every case, socialist elites promised that if only they could direct the economy, everything would be better. Except we have to be able to direct all of it and build from the ground up, not just sparsed about here and there. Very quickly, everything got worse. In socialist nation after socialist nation, the only way the government could keep its disgruntled people in line was to surveil and terrorize them. By contrast, in countries with a high degree of economic freedom, elites are not in charge because everyone is in charge. People work, build, invest, save, and create according to their own interests and in service to the common good of the fellow citizens. Is it just me? Or does it sound like this is something they want? Because that's socialism, people. Or communism. Anyway. Depending on how you set it up. I swear, my hand's just falling asleep. People, I'm sorry. There's a reason why the private economy hews to the maxim, the customer is always right. The rest of that is the customer is always right in matters of taste. It doesn't mean the customer is always right. That little part is always forgotten because of capitalism. While government bureaucracies are notoriously user-unfriendly, just as there is a reason why private charities are cheerful and government welfare systems are not. It's not because grocery store clerks and PTA moms are good and federal bureaucrats are bad. It's because private enterprises, for-profit or non-profit, must cooperate to succeed. Okay. So as the American people take back their sovereignty, constitutional authority, respect for their families and communities, they should also take back their right to pursue the good life. Again, that little bit I don't necessarily disagree with. It's how they plan to get there that is the problem. And I think this is where a lot of people are getting stuck, because if you read this beginning part, there are bits and pieces that even I, as a very progressive person on the left, can say, yeah, sure, that sounds great. But nobody goes through and reads the whole thing. And so that's what we're going to do. Hopefully these videos are available to people after the fact. I will figure out a way. I probably should have screen recorded this. Anyway, I'll figure this out as we go further along, I'm sure. If anybody has any tips and tricks, you can, I don't know if I can see the comments here after the fact. So if you do have any tips or tricks to make this easier for me, I posted a video a few days ago about starting this, so you can leave a comment there. I'd appreciate it. This is my first live, so the next president should promote pro-growth economic policies that spur new jobs and investment, higher wages, and productivity. Yes, that agenda should include overdue tax and regulatory reform, but it should go further and include antitrust enforcement against corporate monopolies. It should promote educational opportunities outside the woke dominated system of the public schools and universities including trade schools, apprenticeship programs, and student loan alternatives that fund students' dreams instead of Marxist academies. Just as important as expanding opportunities for workers and small businesses, the next president should crack down on the crony capitalist corruption that enables America's largest corporations to profit through political influence rather than competitive enterprise and customer satisfaction. I have such a hard time with this word. Analogous. Pro-growth reform for America's voluntary civil society are also in order. America is not an economy. It is a country. Economic freedom. No, America is not America is a country, but we have an economy. Economic freedom is not the only important freedom. Freedom of religion and from religion, I'm going to add that, freedom of speech and the freedom to assemble also present key components in the American promise. Today, in addition to the problems of big tech censorship, we see speakers at universities shouted down, parents investigated, and